Good morning, students. Today I will discuss with you literature review. If you remember in the past class, what is research? In the beginning of that talk, I said we all are researchers. We all ask a question. We all encounter problems in our life. We search answers. We search the solution to our problem. And some of the answers and solutions we get easily, and some of the answers and solution we don't find easy way to get it. For that, we do a in-depth study, and for that study we require certain resources, and that resources is known as the literature. So, for the in-depth study of those resources and literature is very much needed in order to find the answer and solution to your question or problem. Right. So we know that resources is the literature, and literatures are mainly the works of the others. Right. And as a researcher we need to review those literature. So literature review means reviewing the literatures means it is the work of others. Then the work of others is the resources for the researcher, and the researcher must review those resources, those literatures. So review of literature means knowing the other. Here, knowing the other means knowing the thoughts of the other, knowing the research about the other, knowing the topic of research of the other. So basically, why we do literature review? Primarily, it helps us to refine our own research ideas. Before doing the literature review, the ideas what a researcher holds after doing the literature review, those ideas uh, gets a refinement. A researcher refine most of these ideas, and a researcher, if he or she will compare himself or herself with uh, with the previous version, uh, with his or her previous version, then one can sense that how the literature review has refined his or her thought. Now, while doing literature review, we must think about, or you must think about, the research question, methodology, data collection method. Now, without thinking the research question, without thinking simultaneously the methodology, without thinking the data collection method, one cannot have literature review. When you are going into the literature, then you have to take care that what research question, you have to think through what research question should I make, what methodology should I put to answer all these research questions, what methods of data collection I must adopt for this research. So these are certain background questions a researcher must have while going through the literature review. Basically, there are four stages of literature review. First, you must study the background of background around your topic. Right. So if I am doing a research on religious conversion, and what will be the background of my topic? The background will be I must study the freedom of religion. That is the background, you know, reading relating to my topic. I must read secularism. That is a background reading. Then, so this is the first stage, background reading around the topic. And the second, doing a detailed search of the sources of information. Now, once you do a background reading, then basically you got knowledge or you get knowledge, the context in which uh, you are going to study your topic, right? So in the context of freedom of religion, I am locating religious conversion. So in the beginning, I uh, I get a idea of the context, idea of freedom of religion. And in second, I mean in the second stage, I am going into the conversion, issues of conversion. What are the different dynamics of conversion? What are the different nuance understanding of conversion? So this is a detailed search of the sources of information. Then the third stage of literature review is evaluating what you have found. So always when you are doing a background reading or when you are having a detailed search of the sources of information on your topic, you must have the evaluative orientation with you. So after going through the context, that is the background reading, the content, that is a detailed search on your topic, you must evaluate what you have understood, what you have found. You must evaluate it. What is there, what is not there, what should have been there, what is the major problem of those theories or understanding. So these are, this certain way you can express your evaluative orientation on your literature review. Now, after evaluating it, you must structure the furnished review, right? You must structure the furnished review. You must follow. There are different, uh, different style of, putting the literature review, and you have to see what is the best style for your research to arrange or to put the literature review. So these are the four stages of literature review. Now next question is why we should do literature review. Why literature review? Now we do literature review in order to know the current situation in our research area. Why we do literature review? It is because we need to know till today what is the current situation in this area. I mean, what is the current situation of research in this area, right? Otherwise, if you will not read or carefully go through literature review, then uh, you know, you may repeat some of the research without knowing it, and you may not connect your research with the existing knowledge. So the knowing and understanding of current situation of the research in your area, uh, it is must for the researcher. So this is the first reason that why we do literature review. And second, to know the research gap. I mean, if I mean, we need to know, is there any gap between uh, between the uh, two researcher, when you compare between two researcher on a same topic, then you may find some gap. Or when you are doing an in-depth study of one work of a particular researcher, you may also find the inconsistency in the argument, right? So these are the way you can find the research gap. Either there is a difference between two researcher in their writing, or there may be some inconsistency uh, in the argument of a particular researcher. So, the main intention of literature review is to find the research gap, because it is through the research gap you are going to justify your research. You are going to say that it is because of this gap I am interested to do research on this topic. And the third reason why we do literature review is to understand the theoretical and methodological approach. Now, when you are going through the literature, when you are observing it, then you will not simply read the lines of the literature. You will read the between the lines. You will read what is the theoretical approach of interpretation of that researcher, of that author, right? Of that intellectual. What is the methodological approach of that author? What methods of data collection that author have used? What method of data interpretation that author has or that researcher has used? So this theoretical and methodological, the understanding of this theoretical and methodological approach will help the researcher to know the suitable theoretical and methodological approach what he has to apply while you know uh, while uh, you will do research. The there is a requirement that the researcher needs some theoretical and methodological approach to apply in his research. And in the literature review, the researcher learn this use of the identification of theoretical and methodological approach. You learn it from the literature, then you decide what is the best theoretical and methodological approach that is suitable for your research. And the fourth reason why we do literature review, to compare and contrast different sources, right? There are different authors, there are different aspects of your research, and different author, different researcher have dealt with different aspects of your research. And when you are going through all these aspects by all these researcher, then you can find certain differences, deviations. And the best way to understand the your research area is to contrast, is to compare all these aspects of your research by different research. So this compare and contrast of different sources, that will give clarification to a researcher, so that that researcher will exactly know what he will go to, what he should do and what he should not do. And the fifth reason why we do literature review is to know the language vocabulary of your topic. You will find in different research topic, it has its own specific language and vocabulary. Now, if you want to do research on a topic, then you have to learn what kind of language and vocabulary you are going to use in your research. And literature review, teaches you that this is the language, this is the vocabulary that must be used in the research of this kind of topic. And the sixth reason why we do literature review to define the research question. This is very important. Now, following to your literature review, there is a section called research question. Now, you must be, or you, I mean, your literature review makes you able to define certain research question, and these research questions are based on the understanding of the research gave. uh, I said in the second point, the second reason, that to know the research gap. Now, research gap is the base for making the research question or hypothesis, right? So, literature review guides you through, research gap to define your research question and to design your hypothesis. And the last reason why we do literature review to understand the link between the theory and practice. So these are the reasons of literature review. Now, what is literature? Now, literature can be many things. Books can come under it, referred journal, non-referred journal, thesis, conference proceeding, newspaper, television, official documents, research report. So internet, these are the different sources of literature. And the researcher must critically evaluate the literature. That critical evaluation of literature is the must while doing the literature review. Now, there are two stages of evaluating the literature. First stage is, we need to, uh, you know, evaluate that who produced the literature, who is the author of that literature. Who is that author? So that question is not a simple question. The answer is not this person is the author of the, you know literature. You have to understand the background of that author. You have to understand the mindset of that author. So, who has produced the literature? Why it was produced in that way? Why the author produced that literature in a particular way? Not, there are different ways of, writing. There are different ways of interpreting. But why the particular author opted a particular way of writing or interpretation? Who is that author? And the second is that the researcher must know the content of literature in terms of information and idea. Okay. So basically, we said that it is all about reading lines and between the lines. In lines, you will find information and idea, that is content of literature. And between the lines, you will find the context. In the lines, you will find the content. Between the lines, you will find the context. And in context, one can understand the author's and his intention, his background. So these are the two stages of evaluating a literature. So evaluating a literature means you have to know the content, you have to know the lines. When I'm saying content, it means you must know the information and ideas of the literature. And second, you must know the between the lines, that is context. And in context, you need to know who is the author who has produced this literature. and why the author has produced the literature in a certain way. Now, what is a critical approach? Now, critical approach basically means it is a way in which we use judgment to evaluate data, information, and knowledge. Now, critical approach basically it is a typical way of judgment, right? Where we evaluate data, information, and knowledge. But this way must be found after looking various forms of literature and after comparing and contrasting among them. Now, this critical approach one individual cannot get easily. You can develop, every individual, every researcher can develop this critical approach. But what is the precondition? How you will develop this critical approach? Now, if you are done with your literatures, right? If you have completed looking various forms of literature, if you have compared all these literatures, if you have found the deficiency of these literatures, if you have contrasted all these literatures, now after doing all these things, automatically that critical, approach a researcher, gets. And that critical approach the researcher is going to use while evaluating data from the field, information from the field, and while interpreting it towards producing the knowledge. Now, what is the purpose of literature? The purpose of literature is to ask a series of questions to the author and to the researcher. I mean, in literature review, someone is a writer, someone who has produced the literature, and there is a reader, and that reader is the researcher. So, two persons are very important in literature review: the person who has created that literature and the person who is going through that literature. And the purpose of literature is to ask a series of questions to the producer of the literature and to the reader of the literature. And what are those series of questions? Let me share a slide. You can see it and you can listen me. You can clearly understand it. Now, these are some of the series of questions a researcher must ask to himself and ask to the producer of that literature or author of that literature. In the left hand side, you can see the question to ask to the author, and in the right hand side, you can see the question to ask to yourself. What are the questions? Okay, now it is more clearer and more visible. So the question what you need to ask to the author is, the first question is that why did you write this? You need to ask to the author or to the producer of the literature, why did you write this? Why you produce this literature? What is your main purpose, or what was your main purpose of producing such a work? And the second question, who did you write it for? I mean, who is your intended listeners for whom you write it? Right. And the third question is that what was your purpose? Right. Sorry. So what was your purpose? So the producer of literature is also an individual, is also guided by his emotion, sentiment, rationality, and you have to know the emotion, sentiment, and rationality of the author while producing this work. So there is always a purpose of a writer or author when he or she produces, uh, any work. And the fourth question is that what questions were you asking, right? So basically, in literature, you will find a narration, and when you are going through the narration, you need to understand the questions. That questions are not clearly mentioned in some of the literature. You will not find the questions uh, what that literature has addressed. But if you read cautiously to the literature, then you will find the questions. I mean, when you are reading critically to that literature, especially, you will feel that as if you are the author of that book, right? So once you are at that level, then you will find what are the questions the author of that literature, the author of that book, is addressing, right? Then you will also ask, what answer did you find? Now, once you know the questions from the narration of that author, then you will detach yourself from the author. You will not be influenced by the logic and the answer of that author in his book. You will detach yourself from, from that literature. Then you will say, what answers did you find? Okay, I got that you were asking this type of questions and you have narrated. But what answer did you find? Right. And the answer, I mean, you will ask this question, what answer did you find? The moment you ask this question, then you will be clearer about the answer that has been given by that author in that book. Now, once you know the questions of the author, once you know the answers of the author in that literature, then you will ask to the author that what is your evidence? Why you answered this question in this way? Why you have understood this problem in this way? And in the last, you will also ask to the author that what is your conclusion? Okay, you understood a problem in a certain way, you answered that problem or question in a certain way, but at the end, what you want to say. So these are the critical questions you need to ask to a author while going through the literature. But at the same time, you should also ask some series of questions to yourself. The first question you should ask to yourself as a researcher, that why am I reading this? Right. You have to justify whether it is a right literature or not. It's up to you. My teacher told that there is no rules how to identify what is a right literature or wrong literature, but it is all about the rule of thumb. Why are you reading this? Is it written for you? Right? Is it written for you? I mean, is it written for me that I should go and I should go through that literature? Then the next question, why am I looking for? I mean, what am I looking for? What is the purpose of my research? Whether the reading of this book is satisfying that purpose or not. What questions am I asking? Right. What is that I am seeking? And that's why I am understanding this literature. So you have to ask, what questions am I asking? When you are asking a question, that's why you are going through the literature to find the answer of those questions. And you are comparing the questions what you are asking within yourself with the questions that also been asked by the author in his or her work, and you are comparing whether you both are asking the same question or you are asking a different question and that author has asked a different question. Then the next question is, do I find the answer credible? I mean, the answer you get after understanding the literature, you have to evaluate your own understanding that, I mean, whatever I understood, is it a credible? Right. Then the next question, do I accept the evidence? I mean, the evidence that has been given by the author, should I accept it or I have something to say on this? And the conclusion, the last question, do I agree with the conclusion? I mean, you can see here the conclusion that is provided by the author, you are free to agree and disagree. So basically, the last three question to yourself, that gives you the critical approach, that helps you to develop a critical. The last three question to yourself, there you can also find certain research gap, you can raise certain research question. This last three questions to yourself makes you, you know, to develop a critical, approach. So I'm stopping it. Okay. So you saw it and I hope that you got it. What are the questions you need to ask? Series of questions what you need to ask to yourself and author. And the very purpose of research is to ask those questions, is to find those questions. And in single word, if I'll say that the purpose of the literature or literature review is to make the researcher to develop the critical, approach. So let me take 2 minutes break, then I'm coming. Welcome back. Then come to the next section of literature review, that how you will search the literature. I mean, how you will find the literature, searching for literature. I said the background reading must be started what you have already know about the topic. That means what you know about the topic, that is the background reading. What you should know about the topic, that is the main focus of literature. Now, when you are doing the background studying, when you are or while going through the background, you will come across the names of prominent writer in the field. So in the background understanding itself, you will find the reference. So basically, a researcher follows this noble method uh, while locating his literature. Basically, snowball method means uh, he is referring the references, then again going to those references, again finding some new logic, argument, theories. Again, he see the references of that research piece, right? So this is the way a researcher get into the literature. The literature is like just like Mahasamudra. It is just like a huge sea, and the researcher must jump into it so that the researcher will find the literature helpful to him or her in his or her research. So when the researcher goes through the background, he comes across prominent writer in his field. Then he can search for work by these experts by means of varieties of technique. Then the researcher may apply various technique in order to uh, search that what are those works that he must go through, right? You can find huge works relating to your topic, and simply looking at the title of the book or article you may not find. You have to go into all these literatures, but going through all the literatures to find the appropriate literatures relating to your topic, it is a very difficult task. So there are some of the technique where you can apply, and you can understand whether you should go through that literature or not. Let me share one of the technique. Actually, these techniques are, there is no technique that is written. These are actually based on the rules of thumb. I mean, it depends on the cleverness of the researcher whether one book is appropriate for you or not. You will see the title, then you have to read the introductory part, you have to read the conclusion. Then this introduction and conclusion reading of that will help you whether that particular book is related to your topic or not. So that's how you have to apply your rule of thumb in order to identify. I mean, you have to search what are the best literature that is related to your work, and you have to do a in-depth study of that literature. Now from your search you may find some work which is have some relevance to your research. You may find very few potentially relevant sources that is very much closely deeply connected with your research. And in both the situation you have to avoid unnecessary reading and selecting that is the relevant for your research. Why you are searching the right literature? Because it is important for a researcher to avoid unnecessary reading. It will consume a lots of time, lots of energy, lots of resources, right? So every researcher wants to avoid unnecessary reading, and that's why they select those reading that is relevant to their research. So that's why they have to apply many rules of thumb in order to find, I mean, in order to select, in order to make a bibliography that As a researcher on this topic, I must read all these literatures because these literatures will ultimately contribute to my understanding of question and to for my answer to those questions. So for researchers, the initial research topic is quite wide and general, and when literature is found and studied, the focus is likely to become narrow and more clearly expressed. Right. So in the beginning, if you ask to any researcher that what is that you are going to do, they will say you something and you will get a feeling that his topic is very broad, very wide, very general. And you feel it because that researcher has not gone through the literature. Now, once the literature, you know, goes through the literature, I mean, once the researcher goes through the, literature, then his topic become narrow. And again, if you'll ask that literature, what is that you are going to research, then you can express more clearly, yeah, on this I'm going to do research. So my focus is this. I'm not dealing with that. So this is how you will search the literature. Then the next part is practicalities of reviewing the literature. Now, initially, you may find large number of potentially interesting sources. Right. Initially, you will find as if almost all these works are related to your research and you have to read all. Since you have little time, you have to carefully select those which are most useful and desirable relating to your research. So, I mean, in the beginning, you find that almost all works are related to your research, and you have to go through it, right? But you don't have much time, so that's why you have to carefully select some of the useful, some of the desirable works that is related to your research. So before starting the literature review, the suggestion to the researcher is that the researcher must think about it, right? So don't simply start the literature. I mean, reviewing the literature means going through the literature, understanding the literature. So before you go through the literature, take a pause, think about it, that why you are reading this material, what is there in this material. Think about it. Now, after thinking, you go through the literature and you will find whether things are matching with your thinking or not. So basically, if you think before you start reading your literature, basically you are uh, you are creating your own interest, right? So whatever you have thought, is it really there? The author is saying so, or author is having some different, mind. So there you can contrast between your thought and the thoughts of the author. So that's how you will start the literature, reading, literature reviewing. This is the practicalities of the literature review. Right. And when you are going through the literature, right, you need to keep records, not only the title list and author list, but also important information which may subsequently used in your research, right? That means when you are going through the literature, then you have to, it is required that you have to keep record of various references. You have to keep record of various quotes and unquotes. You have to keep the records of various information because you do not know when those reference, when those quotes, when those information will become necessary for you. When, I mean, you do not know at what stage of your research these records becomes a necessity for you. So what are these important information that you should keep record? First, uh, the reference. Second, the possible quotes and unquote. Third, the key arguments of the literature. And fourth, your own notes. So when you are going through the literature, you must make your own notes. Your own notes. What is that? I mean, uh, I said, no, I mean, before you start the literature, that you must think. So when you thought, then went into the literature, then obviously, while going through the literature, uh, many thoughts will come to your mind, and you have to take notes of that thought in connection to that literature. Right. Then the next section is the presenting the review of literature. I mean, how to present the literature review. Now, since it is a significant section or chapter of your research, thesis, or dissertation, you need to put it between introduction and methodology. So, first is the introduction, second is the literature review, third is the methodology. So, within the introduction and methodology, you can put the literature review. In literature review, initial introductory ideas are developed and explored in more depth. That means in introductory chapter, you will write the background of your research. And I said from the background, you have to take the reference and you have to do a in-depth study. So the introductory ideas, I mean, what is there in literature review? Now the introductory ideas, the ideas that is there in the introduction, those ideas are developed and explored in more depth in the literature review. So introduction is connected with the literature review. I mean, in introduction, what you have written, you have to do a in-depth analysis of those things in the literature review. Now, this chapter provides a link between your introduction and your research question. So, from the introduction, you are coming to the literature review, and from the literature review, you have to make certain research question. You have to simultaneously, think, design, and express the research. I mean, methodology section. Right. So these are all connected from introduction to literature review, to from literature review to research question, and from research question to methodology. Now, in literature review, short discussion, mini essays are developed around the key area of research topic. I mean, how you will write the literature review. Generally, we see that students write literature review. This is the author. This is his argument. This is the author. This is his argument. I suggest you not to do that. That is not the ideal way of doing it. Because if you do that, then it exposes that you have not developed a critical approach. The purpose of literature review is to develop a critical approach. Now, if you are having a critical approach, then in literature review, you know, create certain narratives, you create certain form of short discussion, you create certain form of mini essays, and you are creating these narratives, discussion, essays around the key area of research topic, right? You can give references, but this is your way of reviewing the literature. So you can, I mean, if you are involved, you can understand what I'm saying. So simply putting the various work, that is not literature review. It doesn't it doesn't expose that you are involved in that research. If you are involved in that research, you have done literature review carefully, then your presentation of literature review will be different. If one will go through those literature review, one will find your analytical skill, your critical approach in that. Literature is drawn to provide supporting evidence for the point you make after reading the literature. So when you are making literature and when you are, you know, making and on making different arguments of the literature, then you have to give the evidence because the reader will understand whether this understanding is your understanding or it is the understanding of the author. So in the literature review, it is not that you will put the values of the author. You can also use your values to counter the values of author. So your presence must be there in the literature review. Right. Your presence is very important in the literature review. What you have thought about the literature, that is very important part of the literature review. A researcher should not say what are the values of the author. The researcher must say it is my value which is checking the values of that author. So the contestation between the reader and the author must be there in the literature review or in the literature section. So literature must exposes the contestation between the reader and author. The series of questions what you have asked to the author, the series of questions what you have asked to the reader, the contestation between them must be there. Then the last part of literature review is process of reviewing the literature, right? So reviewing the literature is an ongoing activity to which you may return to a number years, you may return to it many times during your research. Can you say that literature review is a complete, can you complete the literature review? No. Literature review is an ongoing process. It starts from your introduction, it ends in your conclusion. But for a good researcher, literature review never ends. It continues till the death of that researcher because you are not satisfied with your conclusion. Again, you are thinking through your conclusion and thinking against your conclusion. Because a researcher is not, a good researcher is one who is not satisfied with his or her own conclusion. He can challenge his own conclusion. He can show different, uh, you know, possibilities of doing research in connection to his, conclusion. A good researcher is always self-critical. This is what I have done, but there are certain problems in this conclusion. I could not handle all these problems because of this reason. But the future researcher can do research and find the answer of this, problem. So reviewing literature is an ongoing activity. Initial reading helps to develop your idea about your research topic, hypothesis, and question. More detailed searching helps to develop research design, sampling, data collection methods, analytical approach, themes or issues you will look for your finding. So in literature review, there are two levels through which you do the literature review. The first is the initial reading, and the second is the detailed reading. So the initial reading of your literature helps you to develop your idea about the research topic, hypothesis, and question. And the detailed reading helps you to develop the research design, the sampling you are going to use, the methods of data collection, the analytical approach, right? So one must have two kinds of reading or two kinds or two ways of dealing with the literature, or not two ways, two kinds of reading. So initial reading and detailed reading. Initial reading produces your clarity towards research topic, hypothesis, and question, and detailed reading produces your idea towards research design, sampling, data collection method, analytical approach. So a well understanding of literature review demonstrates in which way your findings are similar or different from the other. So if you have done your literature review duly, perfectly, appropriately, it will help you in the conclusion, right? When you will try to contrast between your work and the work of your predecessor. There, this literature review will help you how your work is different from the other, how your work is similar to the other. It helps you to explain your finding in relation to theory. So basically, a good literature review helps you to become a theoretical person and to become a author. So a researcher becomes a author. The reader of the literature becomes a producer of literature by a good literature review. So this is the contribution of literature review to the research and to the researcher. So thank you very much.